and it was filled with feds. And now here, this guy's got a great Substack. He says on January 6th, a masked man wearing an earpiece and a walkie-talkie was caught on video removing a glass window from the Capitol. When he realized he was being recorded, he pushed another man and blamed him for it. He's not been added to the FBI's most wanted list, arrested, or charged. Let's watch it.
Why don't you guys open up the record? Because I think that part would be illegal. Oh, I know my glasses. I got my... I'm just picking up garbage.
And so that was the guy trying to incite. He goes, why don't you guys open up? Did he say open up the doors, or was it unintelligible? It's like, what? The guy goes, hey, that would be illegal. So that's the undercover Fed trying to incite people to do illegal stuff. And the guy says, hey, I'm not going to do that. That would be illegal. I'm just picking up garbage. And so then when Powell turns around, he captures on video that suspicious actor guy and who was vandalizing the window. And watch what he does. So this guy goes, there he is. So now this guy jumps in between him and the building, trying to get him to stop doing that. Right? He goes, get the F out of here.
Do not go in there.
Do not go in there. And so now the Fed starts to pretend like he's the guy who broke the window. Watch this. Suspicious actor 1 threatens the crowd and blames the broken window on him.
That's how you know it's a cop.
That's how you know it's a cop. Despite the vandalism, the man in black hasn't been placed on an FBI wanted list.
Hey, where have I seen this before? The BLM?
They do this all the time. This is what they do. Yes, we saw it at
The
BLM.
guy in the outfit breaking windows?
Breaking windows, and he was a cop from another city. So this is what the government does. They put people inside crowds like this to discredit them and do whatever they want. They wanted them to go into the Capitol and do this so they could have this narrative, so they could have Trump never run again, because they've lost control. People will no longer vote for Democrats or Republicans. They'll vote for a game show host before they vote for them, and they know it. So that's why they got to get control of the narrative. And so there's lots of videos like this. There's another video right here of a guy holding this thing open with a pipe, open up the door so people can go in and out. That guy's never been arrested. That guy's never been charged. That guy's never been put on a wanted list. And here's Ted Cruz, and he's going to be asking questions. I think this is the second in command at the FBI or the Justice Department. And let's watch what the question is and what the answer is.
How many FBI agents or confidential informants actively participated in the events of January 6th?
How many FBI agents or informants were there on January 6th? Easy question, right?
Sir, I'm sure you can appreciate that I can't go into the specifics of sources and methods.
Did any FBI agents or confidential informants actively participate in the events of January 6th? Yes or no?
Sir, I can't answer that.
Did any FBI...
Of course, the answer is yes. If the answer is no, they would say no. The question is, how did FBI agents participate? I can't answer that. That's a yes.
Agents or confidential informants commit crimes of violence on January 6th?
I can't answer that, sir.
Ha!
Did any FBI agent...
No, they're not allowed to do that, even if they're agent. I thought they're not allowed to be violent like
they're
that.
Not allowed to be violent or commit... So they're allowed to be violent and commit crimes, even if they're undercover? No, of course not. So your answer should be no, they didn't. Of course not.
Or FBI informants actively encourage and incite crimes of violence on January 6th?
Sir, I can't answer that.
Ms. Sadburn, who is Ray Epps?
I'm aware of the individual, sir. I don't have the specific background to him.
Well, now Ray Epps was the guy we've done videos about. He was the guy saying we got to go into the Capitol. He was the guy bragging about orchestrating it, and he was never charged, and we all know it was because he's an undercover Fed.
Wasn't there some Washington Post article that came out not long ago about how repentant he was?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Yeah, the New York Times did like a puff piece on him. He's like the one January 6th guy they like.
Yeah, he's the one guy like, hey, I'm just a victim. Why don't you hate him? He was telling people to go into the Capitol. He's wearing a Trump hat. Why don't you hate that guy? Oh, that's right, because he's a Fed. Here we go.
There are a lot of people who are understandably very concerned about Mr. Epps. On the night of January 5th, 2021, Epps wandered around the crowd that had gathered. And there's video out there of him chanting, "Tomorrow, we need to get into the Capitol, into the Capitol." This was strange behavior, so strange that the crowd began chanting, "Fed, Fed, 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 Fed." Ms. Sandburn, was Ray Epps a Fed?
Sir, I cannot answer that question.
The next day, on January 6th, Mr. Epps is seen whispering to a person, and 5 seconds later, 5 seconds after he's whispering to a person, that same person begins to forcibly tear down the barricades. Did Mr. Epps urge them to tear down the barricades?
Sir, similar to the other answers, I cannot answer that.
Shortly thereafter,
So that's the person from the Justice Department looking and sounding like a criminal because they are criminals. Even if they have red hair and super white skin.
FBI put out a public post seeking information on individuals connected with violent crimes on January 6th. Among those individuals, in the bottom there, is Mr. Epps. The FBI publicly asked for information, identifying, offering cash rewards for information leading to the arrest. This was posted, and then, sometime later, magically, Mr. Epps disappeared from the public posting. According to public records, Mr. Epps has not been charged with anything. No one's explained why a person videoed urging people to go to the Capitol, a person whose conduct was so suspect the crowd believed he was a Fed, would magically disappear from the list of people the FBI was looking at. Ms. Sandburn, a lot of Americans are concerned that the federal government deliberately encouraged illegal and violent conduct on January 6th. My question to you, and this is not an ordinary law enforcement question, this is a question of public accountability. Did federal agents or those in service of federal agent actively encourage violent and criminal conduct on January 6th?
Boop, boop, boop.
Not to my knowledge, sir.
So that was remarkable. And what I just want to, just so you know, what Glenn Greenwald says, hey, hate Ted Cruz all you want, but these questions about the FBI's role in January 6th are vital because it's what the FBI did in the first war on terror and with the Governor Whitmer case, but also because there's ample evidence that they did it here. The media's indifference to this story is shameful. And just so you know, the lefty media or the establishment media in bed with the Democrats has already said they've debunked this. They go, January 6th panel has debunked a conspiracy theory that popped up even in Congress this week. Popped up. They call what Ted Cruz just did a conspiracy theory.
Came out like a pimple. It popped up.
Yeah, popped up. Ray Epps was no secret government agent. How does Politico know that? They don't know that. Politico is doing propaganda for the establishment.
Well, I believe they asked him, right? And he said no. And they said good enough for us.
And that was good enough for them. So even Mother Jones tried to debunk it, but inside Mother Jones's own report, they said this: while the FBI does have a history of recklessly setting up fake terrorist plots through the use of informants, especially as a tool in the war on terror, Ray Epps as FBI agent is as best speculative.
What? That doesn't... Yeah, I'm speculating based on the history of setting up fake things. Like, what do you mean at best? It is the best.
So now here is Kash Patel. He, if you don't know who he was a prosecutor, a defense lawyer. He worked in the Trump White House. He's worked for the Justice Department. He's worked in intelligence. Here is what he has to say.
As a former federal prosecutor and a public defender who defended a lot of these types of cases, what you need to show is whether or not the FBI and government agents were using undercover operatives and informants on the day of January 6th, because if you can show that, you know they've been out. Hang on. But the paperwork shows having run informants, That's a 6-month buildup minimum.
Right.
Minimum. It's not like they just dropped him into the Proud Boys and said, hey, go, don't disrupt, please. So once you prove that, then you defeat the insurrection narrative with the FBI's own documentation. Forget what the videotape shows.
So he's saying if you can prove that they did have FBI informants and stuff in there, that means that they've been planning this for months. That's what he's saying, right, Max? Am I misunderstanding?
Yes.
Wait, so is that why it clearly looks like they did do that?
Yes. He's got a little bit more to say.
Just for people who you can't see what's going on in the room, the reason why Cash just said hang on or whatever is because I started smirking and rolling my eyes. And what I meant to convey with that is, come on, we know they were involved.
No, look, I totally
clarify,
agree.
though.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I know definitively. What I'm saying is a reasonable suspicion is that there were agents. There's a video showing a guy with an earpiece pulling people into the building. All right. Mm-hmm. You combine that with the evidence of Ray Epps, and it looks like you have a preponderance of evidence suggesting there may have been federal law enforcement involved in making that thing happen.
I'll get you beyond a reasonable doubt.
All
Two
right.
pieces of information. Ray Epps was on FBI's most wanted list one day, and the next day he was off of the FBI's most wanted list. There are only two ways that happens. You die or your informant. Put that aside. Under congressional testimony, Jill Sanborn, who I used to work with, the head of the FBI Counterintelligence Division, in charge of all these investigations, testified under oath when Senator Cruz asked her, flat out, were there federal agents involved with January 6th? And she said, quote, Senator, I can't answer that at this time. Not if the answer was definitively no, having been a DOJ FBI guy myself, she would have gone there and said, nope, absolutely not. The reason she said I can't answer that is because of the same stonewalling they gave us during Russiagate with Christopher Steele, Halper, and everybody else. It's the same narrative, and I'm telling you they were there.
So you're saying that she said I can't answer that because the answer is yes,
Yeah.
and that would compromise whatever their operation was.
Exactly.
And let's remember the beloved comedian Norm Macdonald, who this is a picture of these are the rioters. And he says, I loved when the violent terrorists made sure to respect the velvet ropes in Statuary Hall.
They just got done killing a cop with a fire extinguisher. Then they got an orderly line.
I wish Norm was around. So let me bring in Max. Max, what do you have to say about all this video evidence of undercover feds, of the Justice Department not answering direct questions about how many feds were in that crowd, if they committed crimes, and of course, Norm Macdonald's great joke?
Well, court documents show that the KC Proud Boys were, in fact, infiltrated by an FBI informant. The New York Times even reported in November 2022 that 8 FBI informants had been planted inside the Proud Boys in the months leading up to January 6th. There was an armed or allegedly armed person with an earpiece seen in the crowd who was dropped mysteriously from the FBI most wanted list. The FBI has acknowledged to planning confidential informants inside the Oath Keepers on January 6th. There is video footage acknowledged by the Capitol Police that they had 3 officers working inside the crowd wearing civilian clothes, which is just weird. Like, why would you do that if the building was supposed to be closed to that crowd? And, copious evidence that goes well beyond Ray Epps. Then you have the issue of the January 5th, 2021 incident where pipe bombs were placed at the RNC, the Republican National Committee and Democratic National Committee, by a masked person who has never been caught or identified. And for some reason, no one asked Christopher Wray about this. We've only seen a little bit of footage of that person planting the bombs, but those bombs had the effect of directing lots of law enforcement resources away from January 6th and away from the U.S. Capitol to separate locations. It's a very suspicious incident. Does Christopher Wray think that person will ever be caught? And does Kevin McCarthy have the full footage? I mean, he apparently does. Journalist Ford Fisher raised these questions on Twitter, and I think these are really important questions because that's one of the main pieces of video used to really stoke fear among the public that this was going beyond the U.S. Capitol and was a city or nationwide terror plot being carried out by seditionists. And if you remember, the day after January 6th walls went up around DC.
Yes.
Like giant 12-foot walls.
Yes.
And 50,000 National Guard troops were sent inside the city to treat us, DC residents, as potential terrorists. It was a show of force against the US population that our political leadership feared. So we have all of this evidence, and I think part of the cover-up or the motivation behind suppressing footage is to cover up the more evidence of the proliferation of FBI informants throughout the crowd.
You think it's possible it was the same mysterious pro-Ukraine group who blew up the pipe?
Well, yeah, I mean,
Nord Stream?
yeah, definitely. I mean, if you consider the U.S. government to be a pro-Ukraine group.
By the way, this was tweeted up by Andrew DeMaio. That's where I got it from. Is there anything else left to this? No, that's the end of this. All right, Max. Well, I really appreciate you coming on, man, and as someone who was there. By the way, as someone who was there, what would you say about that crowd? Because I knew someone else who was there, a regular person that I've known for 30 years. And he just happened to be there. He wasn't a particularly political person. He just wanted to go there. And he told me that what he experienced and what he saw on the news were two totally different things. And what would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I have the way I went about my activities on that day was that I focused on the most violent or raucous elements of the crowd that were on the east side of the Capitol, the back of the Capitol. And I managed to get there right as that crowd was being pushed out. I asked a guy, what just happened? I heard someone just got shot, and he told me what happened. And then I realized as he walked away, he was wearing a shirt that said Camp Auschwitz, which was kind of jarring. And then I saw Ashley Babbitt be taken out on a stretcher with blood pouring out of her neck. The one person who was actually killed that day. Her mother is leading a vigil every night outside the jail where the protesters are still being held. And then on the other side of the Capitol, you had this giant crowd that Tucker showed that was, in fact, mostly peaceful. Most of that crowd was, and it was families and just people like revelers, and they're, playing oldies on these massive speakers. And, they were a raucous crowd, but they were not attacking anyone. And, you would go there and families would ask me directions to how to get to the metro. So there were several different components to the crowd. And of course, the one that we see is the most violent one. I did a lot of work studying the most violent elements. And what I found was that the group that Ashley Babbitt was part of was being incited by really 2 or 3 people it was almost like they had hypnotized this group of 15 or 20 people to keep pushing forward. And Ashley Babbitt was the one who ultimately went forward too far and got shot. I did an article on it. And it was, so obviously it's far more complex than we're being made to understand than the version that's been presented, obviously.
Okay, Max Blumenthal. Everybody check out the Grayzone. Thanks for being our guest, pal.
Thanks a lot, Jimmy.
Okay, let's go
Good
to
Kurt.
You too, brother.
Let's go to a card. Oh, by the way, Max is going to be on our shows coming up in July 14th, 15th. I'm going to be in Baltimore. And so Max has accepted my invitation to do his standing up comedy routine, which is he's batting 1,000. He hasn't had a bad set yet.
So far, I got the home, the home crowd.
Yeah, he
Jimmy Dore audience.
Let's see you do a bringer in the belly room.
Pretty good. Yeah.
And he crushed it in DC at our last show there. So we'll be there in July, middle July, July 14th, 15th at Magooby's Comedy Club in Baltimore, which is one of the sweetest clubs in the country.
It's an awesome venue. I went to your last show there. It's
a
big venue, really good service.
350
awesome.
seats, and it's tiered, right? So it's not all flat.
Yeah.
It's like, it's beautiful. It's really a nice club.
Yeah. I'm really excited.
Yeah. Okay. See you then.
Sells out.
All right. I'm sure it will. If you want to see my stand-up special, become a member at jimmydore.com. It's only $10, and come see our live stand-up comedy in Los Angeles, Palm Springs, Milwaukee, St. Paul, Honolulu, Northampton, Massachusetts, Syracuse, Cohoes, New York, Hartford, and more.